I'm going to talk you through my strategy for sending leads into different campaigns based on what criteria they meet in terms of intent signals. This is a really useful thing to do if you start off with one big list that is built based on traits. For example, certain company size, certain industries, certain job titles. And then what you want to do is segment all of those leads into different campaigns based on triggers. So in order to do that, you basically firstly need to decide what is going to be the order of those signals. What is the most important signal for you? What is the strongest signal that's most likely to lead to the most positive replies? In this example, you can see that what we have is a workbook. Looking along the bottom from left to right, you can see that the first table that we're looking at right now is called Step 1, Rank, Email, and Location. So what does that mean? That means this is our master list. And in this example, this came from Apollo, but it could easily come from serpa.dev or just Clay itself. And what we're doing in this table is a few things. So we are normalizing the domain. We are ranking the people in each company. So I like to use this, especially if I source leads from Apollo, where Apollo doesn't have the ability to limit the number of people per company. So what I do is a ranking process where firstly, we use this look at multiple rows in other table, and we simply set this to look up rows in the same table where the domain equals the domain. In other words, we want to see how many people there are in each company. And you can see that it shows 1 record found, 1 record found, 2 records found. And then we have a ranking step. So this ranking only runs if we have more than, I think, 4 people per company. So what we're doing here is we're saying, have a look at the list of the records from all of these records here, from the look at multiple rows in other table, which is this table. And then we're saying, have a look at them and assign a rank from 1 to n on each person based on their job title. So we're giving this prompt some examples of rank 1 job titles, and then mid-level rank titles, and then lower ranks. And this enables us to filter out people who have less buying power. Now, you don't have to do it based on seniority. You can do it on any criteria that is important for you. For example, if you're interested in people who are more senior and also have a job function in finance, for example, CFO, finance director, so on, then you can just tweak the prompt for that. But in this case, because you can see that we only have 1 or 2 people per company, this ranking step is not running. And then we have a formula that just says if the number of decision makers or DMs in the same company is equal to or less than 4, then check this box to say their rank is okay. Or if it's higher than 4, but their ranking is 4 or less, then check this box. And so that's how we filter out all the people that don't have enough buying power for our needs. Next, we put them through an email waterfall. So that's pretty self-explanatory. So let me just cover this very briefly. We have the email address that came from Apollo. What we do as a first step is we run bound span on that to see if it's deliverable or not. And if it is deliverable, then we don't need to run the waterfall. But if it's not, for example, this one here, Christopher Capelli, you can see that he didn't have an email address in the list from Apollo. So in that case, we start off by normalizing his first name. So if his name said something like Christopher Capelli, CPA or PMP, or whatever it might be, we remove all of that stuff. We just want the first name and the last name. That's also why we normalize the domain over here, because we want to use those when we're going to run Kit. So Kit is the tool that we normally use to find people's email addresses, and the inputs for that are going to be their normalized full name and then their normalized URL. In this case, Kit didn't find it, so debounce didn't run, bounce span didn't need to run. But then Lead Magic, as the second step, did find an email address for him, and debounce was able to validate that email address. So bounce span didn't need to run, and then we have our final merged valid email addresses here. So that's finding the email address step. So we've covered rank and we've covered email. And then the next step is the lead location. So we have a need for knowing exactly where each person is based in terms of their city, their state, and their country. Really, we just need their city and their state. But the reason why we need this is we've recently built some automations that can suggest times to leads who reply positively to our cold emails. And we can suggest times to those leads in their own time zone based on what times are available in our calendar or in our clients' calendars. So this is a real game-changing automation that we've been able to build. And in order for that to work correctly, we need to make sure that we have their city and their state. So a lot of that information comes from Apollo. But in some examples, for example, this one, Alan Mann, there's no contact city, it just says California. So that's okay though, because California has its own time zone. But if I was to find an example where we don't have a city or a state, then what we can do, for example, Steve Sullivan here, is we can run this Clagent step that's going to use his LinkedIn profile, and it's going to look up the location listed on his LinkedIn profile, and he's based in San Francisco, California, so then we get that, and now we have the lead location merged, which we can use for our appointment setting automation. So from there, we have all of the main information that we need for this to run. So from there, it's a case of feeding the leads from this table into other tables. And so the first thing you need to do is decide what is the most powerful intent signal of all the intent signals that I'm thinking of using. In this example, it's if the company has an active job post. The first step in this process is to find jobs at that list of companies where those leads are. And there were very few jobs for the type of jobs that we need. There were only 3 out of 1,500 leads. And so they're in probably about 700 companies or 1,000 companies. We searched for very specific types of jobs and we only found 3. That's totally fine. What we did then is we looked up multiple rows in another table. What we're doing here is we're looking up all of the decision makers in that first table and pulling them all in. And it turns out that there was only 1 record for study fetch and there was only 1 record for any signal. And from there, we're going to send that table data, including this list of records, into the next table, which is signal 1. So here's signal 1. It only has 2 leads. That's fine. We can widen the industry or widen other search criteria to get a lot more decision makers at companies that have specific types of jobs that we need. But that's the first signal, right? The second signal in this example is if any of these companies in that first table have offshore staff. So the next step that we need to do is look up, so we do a find people search, and the inputs for this are, if we go to the companies, you can see it says look up companies or use the companies in that first table called step 1, only 1 filtered view where the rank is okay and we have a valid email address. So we create a filtered view in that first table and we use that filtered view because we don't want to know, we don't need to find offshore staff in companies where we just don't have a valid email to contact the decision maker anyway. So we might as well save some Clay credits and OpenAI tokens that way and focus on the people who we can actually contact. And so we're basically just looking for people who have certain job titles who are in countries where companies tend to offshore to, so the Philippines, Pakistan, India, so on and so forth. And again, very small number of results, but that's okay. Now we're going to mention these people in the email that we send out to the decision maker. So as you can see, their offshore full names have comma CPA. This one's in block capitals. So if we're going to mention those names in emails, it's a good idea to normalize those full names. And so we have full name normalization here. And those have been normalized. And then again, we just look up all of the decision makers in these companies. You can see this one has 3 decision makers. And then we send that table data to our Signal 2 table. And there's not many of them, but that's okay. We can easily adjust the settings of the search criteria to find a lot more people at companies that meet this signals criteria. But the great thing about doing it this way, you can see we have Signal 3 is if they've posted on LinkedIn. Signal 4 is if we found recent news about their company that's relevant to how our client's company can help them. Signal 5 is if they've had any recent funding of specific types within the last 6 months. Signal 6 is if the company was founded within the last 3 years. And then Signal 7 and 8 are in one table. And that is, Signal 7 is basically if they posted on LinkedIn, but their post does not have a strong level of relevance to what it is that we do and how we can help them, but it's still worth reaching out to them and mentioning that post. It just wouldn't be as strong as people that got a score of 2 or 3 for their post's relevance to how we can help them. And then the final Signal 8 is just a fallback signal where it's not even a signal. It's basically just if we couldn't find any signal in Signals 1 to 7 for any of those remaining leads, then we're just going to contact them anyway because they still meet the traits that make them viable as a lead. We just don't have any signals that we can use to qualify them or mention in our outreach. And so the reason why I've grouped Signals 7 and 8 together is because this workbook has 10 tables in it. And if you want to duplicate any workbook, the maximum number of tables that you can have in a workbook is 10. And so originally I had 11 tables in this workbook where Signal 7 and Signal 8, or just traits, fallback, were in their own separate tables, but I had to merge them together into one table. The great thing about separating out your signals and having one signal per table is that it's very easy to swap things around and it's very easy to remove certain signals. So for example, right now this is a list of SaaS decision makers. If I was to do this for a different industry, for example, consulting firms, it's very unlikely that a consulting firm would receive funding. It does happen, but not as commonly as SaaS. Therefore, Signal 6, which is Signal 5, which is funded in the last 6 months, pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B, then we would just delete this table. And then in Signal 4, the previous signal, where we have the send data to other table, send table data, which is here, instead of sending it to Signal 5, which would no longer exist for the consulting firms, we would just send that data into Signal 6 table. And so this makes it very easy to plug and play things and swap things around. If you decide later on that, oh, it turns out that recent news is the most powerful signal and it's generating the most leads, let's move this table to the left so that it comes in just after step 1. It's going to be the first signal that we use to qualify leads. Then we'll push all of our leads from the first table where we've checked for their rank, their email address and their location. We'll push them all into the recent news table first, and then we'll send the remaining leads that didn't qualify for that recent news signal into the second signal, and then the third and the fourth and the fifth and the sixth and so on. So this is a very, what can I say, adaptable, changeable, configurable way to build your Clay workbooks if you're going to do this kind of campaign routing. And it makes things very easy. So I highly recommend that you do it. Hope that this video was useful for you. If you enjoyed it, then I have a ton more content just like this coming out soon. So consider subscribing to the channel. And if you're looking for help for your own lead generation for your B2B business, consider clicking the link in the description and booking a call and let's have a chat. Thanks. Talk to you soon.